What is up, guys? It is Katie, and it has been a long week for me. I don't know how it's been for you guys, but my week has been crazy. And I have been really focusing on a midterm that I have for one of my classes, and it's a month-long class, and there's just so much information packed in. And yeah, that was probably one of the hardest tests I've ever taken in my life. Also, like, practicum is going well. I'm getting my footing and getting established there, and I'm super excited. I think my first client that I had, I was, like, so nervous, and I evaluated the heck out of that session, like, afterwards. But I found out that my client actually referred a friend to me, so I'm like, okay, I must have done something right. So that's exciting. Getting more clientele and doing the work, and I'm excited about it. I really love the place that I'm at, and things are going well. I'm also doing a motorcycle safety course this weekend, like all weekend long. Crazy. I'm honestly just really wanted to take it, so pretty much just to kind of brush up on my skills a little bit, since it's been a while since I've rode the motorcycle. So why not? Also, I have some news, I guess. I was contacted by someone who asked me if I would be interested in bringing on 2 guests on the podcast, probably at 2 separate times. And that is so exciting, you guys. I think a lot of people really enjoyed the episode with Dr. Siobhan Scott, and she's an incredible lady. And someone that she knew contacted me and referred these 2 people and asked if I would want to have them on the show. And I think it's always cool to hear different perspectives, and I kind of read a little brief story about what they want to talk about and things like that, and I think it's going to be really interesting, their perspective, because I guess they were more of not victims of a true crime case, but essentially yes, like having close relation to someone who committed the crime and or who committed the crime on someone that they had a deep connection to. So I think that will be really interesting to have that perspective, and I'm always open to that. I think that is so cool, and I'm so tickled when people reach out to me and I'm like, oh, my little podcast, do you really want to come on here? But I think it's really cool that people want to do that. And so, yeah, that's something exciting to look forward to. And, well, last week we talked about nature versus nurture. And I know I mentioned attachment theory a lot in that episode. So I thought it would be really cool this week to naturally, get it, nature versus nurture, talk about attachment theory. And also love, because love and attachment, they kind of go hand in hand, I guess. We'll get more into that in this episode. So with that, I'm your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you're listening to What the Psychology. Okay, so let's first start out with love. So there is a theory called the triangular theory of love, which was developed by psychologist Robert Sternberg, and there are 3 components of love. So those are intimacy, passion, and commitment. So intimacy encompasses feelings of attachment, which is kind of what we're going to go over today, closeness, connectedness, and bondedness. Passion encompasses drives that are connected more to like sexual attraction and lust. Or even they call it limerence. Commitment, of course, we know it encompasses, well, there are kind of 2 parts of this. In the short term, it's decision to remain with one another. And in the long term, it's the shared achievements and plans made with the other person. So affectionate behaviors like touching, holding, kissing, or hugging help to provide us with a sense of loving safety and trigger the limbic system to release vasopressin, which helps us to form bonds. And of course, we all know oxytocin, which we all call the love hormone. And that helps combat stress or lower cortisol levels, promotes feelings of closeness with others, and helps to soothe us. Bonding during infancy is not only important for us for our survival, but it provides us with safety, comfort, and security we need when we are stressed or in danger, which is attachment theory we will go over in further detail. It also protects our physical and psychological well-being. Humans are not the only ones who are actually affectionate toward one another for the purposes of love and forming bonds. Tenderness can be seen among other mammals that form bonds with one another and display affectionate behaviors like nuzzling in horses or kissing and hugging in chimpanzees, which is very interesting, like we're not the only ones. Maternal love is only one type of love that we experience in our lives, and this psychologist, Sternberg, he proposed that different types of love involve different types or different amounts of intimacy. So trust, warmth, and closeness, and then also passion and commitment. In the triangular theory of love, there are considered 7 main types of love. So friendship is warmth and closeness to another person, intimacy, but no intense passion or long-term commitment. Infatuation, which we sometimes call love at first sight or lust or passion. Of course, there's passion, but there's a lack of intimacy and commitment. So infatuated love can disappear suddenly. And then there's empty love, which sounds kind of depressing. But honestly, in this type of love, it means that there is commitment that exists in the relationship, but there's no intimacy and passion. With that, then you have romantic love, which is intimacy and passion exist, but no commitment. So a lot of that is more of like the hookup culture in a sense. Companionate love. So this is intimacy and commitment exist, but the relationship lacks passion. And a lot of people at some point in their relationship get kind of stuck in that area, which is pretty normal. Then you have fatuous love. So commitment is motivated primarily by passion, but it lacks intimacy. Honestly, I would say that is probably more hookup culture versus romantic love, because at least with romantic love, you have intimacy. But the fatuous love does involve commitment, so it's kind of a toss-up between the two. And then last but not least is consummate love. This is the ideal relationship because this involves all 3 elements. You have intimacy, passion, and commitment. Probably the type of relationship we are all looking for. Now, there are studies and evidence that early bonding and attachment that we form with our parents when we are young, they play a key role in how we form romantic relationships and bonds later in life. So in adult romantic relationships, when we feel safe and secure, and we have responsive partners and have close, intimate contact with our partners, we typically have a secure adult romantic relationship, which it correlates with a secure attachment when you're younger. On the other hand, people who form a type of insecure attachment known as like dismissive or avoidant, which we'll go in more detail, they may be uncomfortable with how close they get to their partners, and in an effort to detach from intimacy, they may engage in alcohol, sex, or other addictions. They might also indulge in other addictive behaviors like paraphilia, which are emotional disorders that are characterized by sexual arousal and fantasies, urges, or behaviors that affect the person's arousal, like voyeurism, which is spying on others in private activities, or exhibitism, which is exposing themselves in front of others. So it's really crazy how our attachments in younger life can affect how we form relationships later. But I do have my own questions, which I kind of mentioned in last episode, about how permanent are our attachments in childhood, and or even if those attachments are made and that relationship between parents changes even when you're a child. How does that affect that attachment? So let's talk about love and lust real quick. So love and lust may be easily confused as mutual attraction, and it's one of the major components of popular dating apps like Tinder, where two people match with people they are attracted to, but one or both people may not necessarily be looking for an actual relationship. They may or may not be looking just for a hookup or however that is, or something more casual, while the other may want something more serious. Now, lust is our innate biological drive to reproduce. That's like biological theory, correct? So it's also present and drives our sexual attraction and need for gratification. So our hormones or androgens, like testosterone and estrogen, they kick in when we are teenagers, which we all know is that lovely time of development called puberty. And it's not soon after that many of us kind of have our first kiss, hopefully. If you're that young and have your first kiss. I think I was a little bit older, but I digress. Many of our primitive biological drives to reproduce are driven by the need for gratification or lust, It's pretty much what that is. Now, in a relationship, it is true that someone may be lusting while the other confuses the other's attraction for their desire to form and commit to a relationship. Although we may be initially driven by our drive, our sex drive, our lust, or our attraction, simply being attracted to someone doesn't mean that a romance or a relationship will advance or last very long. Which is the reason why there's those 7 different types of love. So, falling in love. Let's talk about this because it's fun. We know that falling in love biologically can activate the reward system. So some people may compare the initial stage of falling in love as being similar to the high produced by cocaine. So that's because infatuation is characterized by intense cravings to see or talk to someone that you are smitten by, and the desires to be closer to them. When we are first falling in love, our attraction is driven by changes in our brain chemicals. And there are a few of these. Dopamine increases, which we know that is also a big component in many type of drugs, like illegal drugs, such as illegal substances. And the increase in dopamine actually motivates us to seek and maintain a relationship with a preferred romantic partner. This is natural dopamine, not just us taking a drug and it being increased or decreased. Norepinephrine gives us a rush of excitement, nervousness, energy, and motivation to pursue our romantic partner. This also produces physical symptoms like a racing heart, flushed skin, and those oh-so-sweaty palms that we sometimes get. Serotonin. We all know serotonin is pretty much linked to mood and a lot of people with depression. That's a whole other topic, but that's where we mainly see serotonin mentioned. So we know that when serotonin decreases, our mood increases. So it's an important neurotransmitter in regulating mood, which is why it is common in depression, why they try to regulate that, because it's also in like function, sleep, appetite, memory, social behavior, and learning. But it's also regulates sexual desire, which is something that's kind of not as common as people think. A lot of people think, oh, maybe oxytocin, which does play a part, but serotonin actually plays a part in that. So if you're newly smitten with your partner, you may see the person as doing no wrong, or you might idolize your partner and neglect to see their flaws or negative traits. A lot of times people say that love is blind, or they miss those red flags. And despite the pleasurable and enjoyable state, infatuation is only temporary, and the elated and euphoric feeling does wear off anywhere after a few months to several years. And it's definitely not what makes people stay together for the long term. And that's why I think it is important when you're meeting someone new, yes, you may be super attracted to them and infatuated, but it's also good to get to know them on a personal level, ask questions, and find out their values. Those important things that are important to you need to line up what's important to them. Is religion important? Do you guys want to ever get married? Do you ever want to have kids? What are your future goals, your career goals? How do you want to raise children if you want them? A big thing that we typically don't talk about is how do you deal with conflict in conversations? How do you express your emotions? Things like that are important to talk about, but often we just don't. So, what makes love last? So, couples do reach the attachment stage, a longer lasting commitment that is also known as companion love. So, this is one that I went over. It's when two romantic partners believe that their relationship is going to last for the long term. Attachments are then strengthened because of the release of oxytocin and vasopressin during intimacy and other affectionate behaviors. These same neuropeptides that are released when we are children and help us form a bond with our mother or primary caregiver. That's why it's so important that attachment is formed when you're younger. When it comes to liking someone versus loving someone, psychologist Zick, that's such a cool name, Rubin, he proposed that romantic love is made up of 3 elements: attachment, caring, and intimacy. So this is a different theory, but we're going to go over it. He believed that sometimes we experience a great amount of appreciation and admiration for others. We enjoy spending time with that person and want to be around them, but this doesn't necessarily qualify as love. Sometimes it's referred to as liking. So that's kind of, I don't want to say when you friend zone someone, but maybe when you friend zone someone. Maybe you find out the values don't match up, or maybe there's not that passion, or maybe you're just better off as friends. So love, on the other hand, is so much deeper than liking. It's more intense and includes a strong desire for physical intimacy and contact. People who are in like, they enjoy each other's company. But those who are in love care as much about the other person's needs as their own. So that's like a better way of kind of describing it. So attachment is the need to receive care, approval, and physical contact with another person. We know that the attachment we form in childhood plays a role in how we are in relationships in the future. With that, I mean, there's other theories on these. There's a book called Colors of Love by psychologist John Lee, and it compares styles of love to like a color wheel. And like there are 3 primary colors. There are 3 primary styles of love. So eros, the term eros, it's a Greek word meaning passionate or erotic. So we know that that involves physical and emotional passion, which I love that it mentions emotional passion because that, I think, is just as important. Ludos, which comes from a Greek word meaning game, and as soon as I read this, I was like, Luda? Like ludicrous. But anyway, that's just me being weird. So that means game, and this form of love is conceived as like playful and fun, but not necessarily serious. And those who exhibit this form of love are not ready for commitment and are kind of wary of too much intimacy. Those are people that are more wanting just to have maybe a girlfriend and not commit. And they just kind of want to have fun and they don't want to talk about anything serious. They don't want that much intimacy, but maybe they want more of that passion. And then last is storge, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right. It stems from Greek, also meaning natural affection. So this form of love is often represented by familial love between parents and children, siblings, extended family members, friends. This can be out of friendship, like I said, where people who share interest and commitments gradually develop affectionate for one another. Continuing this color wheel analogy, Lee proposed that just as the primary colors can be combined and created with complementary colors, these 3 styles of love can be combined and create 9 different secondary love styles. Let's go through this. So the 3 types: eros, loving an ideal person; ludos, love is a game; and then storge, love is friendship. Okay. Now, secondary styles. mania, which it's funny because mania in the psychological terms means something completely different. But this is when you mix eros and ludos, is obsessive love. So love is a game and love ideal. Pragma, which is ludos and storge. So love is a game and friendship. So realistic and practical love. Agape, which is eros and storge. So friendship and ideal love is selfless love. And agape is actually used in the Bible a lot too, and it's supposed to mean like sacrificial love, selflessness love. It's the highest form of all-encompassing love. So, now that we talked about love, let's talk about attachment. So, what is attachment? So, it is defined as lasting psychological connectedness between human beings, and it may be considered interchangeable with concepts such as affectional bond and emotional bond. So human beings' first attachment is often established during infancy with their primary caregiver. However, it must be noted that attachment is not unique to infant caregiver relationships, but may also be present in other forms of social relationships. I think that is so important because if you grew up in a very insecure, attached home, you can work on yourself and still have healthy relationships with other people outside of that. I think that is very important to note. There are attachments of various kinds. They're formed through repeated active attachment behaviors or attachment transactions. It's a continuing process of seeking and maintaining a certain level of proximity to another specified individual. So, because caregivers vary in their levels of sensitivity and responsiveness, which are very important to forming attachment, not all infants attach to caregivers in the same ways. And what I think is so crazy is not even too long ago, parents were told when your babies cry, let them cry. Don't pick them up. Don't coddle them. Don't respond to them. But through research, we've learned how dangerous that is and how they won't form a healthy attachment to their caregiver. The attachment theory does originate with John Bowlby. And in the 1930s, he worked as a psychiatrist in a child guidance clinic in London, and he treated many emotionally disturbed children. So this experience led him to consider the importance of the child's relationship with their moms or their caregivers when it came to social, emotional, and cognitive development. Specifically, it shaped his belief about the link between early infant separations with the mother and later maladjustment, and also led Bowlby to formulate his own attachment theory. So he proposed that attachment can be understood within an evolutionary context, in that the caregiver provides safety and security for the infant. Attachment is adaptive as it enhances the infant's chance of survival. So children come into the world biologically pre-programmed to form attachments with others because this will help them survive. And this is illustrated in other works such as Lorenz and Harlow. And according to Bowlby, infants have a universal need to seek close proximity with their caregiver when under stress or threatened. We know that attachment behaviors in adults towards the child includes responding sensitively and appropriately to child's needs. Such appears universal across many cultures. It explains how the parent-child relationship emerges and influences subsequent development. Attachments are most likely to form with those who respond accurately to the baby's signals, not the person they spend more time with. Which I know I read a study conducted, and it was about a lot of women who were concerned because they were going into the workforce after having a child, and they were concerned about their bond or their attachment to their child, and their child being in daycare or some other type of care. They were worried that because they weren't spending as much time with them, that they would lose that bond and that their child would form a bond with someone else. And so research did prove that it wasn't about the quantity of time, it was about the quality of time that helped form that attachment that kept that bond alive. It's about them responding to their needs and their sensitivity to them. So that's also important to note. So Bowlby had this initial theory about attachment that, okay, attachment is important and that it affects us later in life, and this is what attachment is. But there were never established like any different types of attachment. It was just kind of an idea. Now, Mary Ainsworth is another important person when it comes to attachment theory. So her and her colleagues discovered 3 major patterns that infants attach to their primary caregivers or mother figures because they did an experiment. This experiment was called the stranger situation procedure, and this was done in 1978. So this study recruited 4 different samples of infants at around 1 year of age and engaged them in the strange situation procedure. And this is how that went. So an infant was put into an unfamiliar environment with his or her mother and then was free to explore the environment. So then a stranger entered the room and gradually approached the infant. Then the mother left the room, and then she would return after the infant spent some time alone with the stranger. Okay, so what does that show? Based on the observations, they sorted the infants into 3 major groups: secure attachment, anxious attachment, and avoidant attachment. They observed how comfortable each infant was being physically farther away from their mother in an unfamiliar environment, how each infant interacted with the stranger, and how each infant greeted the mother upon their return. So, attachment styles refer to the particular way in which an individual relates to other people. I've already said that a million times. The concept involves one's confidence in the availability of attachment figure for use as a secure base from which one can freely explore the world when not in distress, as well as a safe haven from which they support protection and comfort in times of distress. Long-winded definition there. I want to go over the different types of attachment, and there's actually been, I think, a 4th added to this. So secure attachment is characterized by trust and adaptive response to being abandoned and the relief that one is worthy of love. So an infant with a secure attachment is characterized as actively seeking and maintaining proximity with the mother, especially during the reunion episode. So the infant may or may not be friendly with the stranger, but they always showed more interest in interacting with the mom. And additionally, during the same situation, the infant tended to be slightly distressed during separation from the mother, but the infant rarely cried. Ainsworth and colleagues, they interpreted infants who were securely attached to their mothers. They showed less anxiousness and more positive attitudes towards the relationship. That was likely because they believed that their mothers would respond toward their needs and take care of them. So the next one is anxious or ambivalent attachment. So these are characterized by a concern that others will not reciprocate one's desire for intimacy. So this is caused when an infant learns that their caregiver or parent is unreliable and does not consistently provide responsive care towards their needs. So an anxiously attached infant is characterized as being somewhat ambivalent and resistant to the mother. The infant often demonstrates signs of resisting interactions with the mother, especially during the strange situation reunion episode. However, once contact with the mother was gained, the infant also showed strong intentions to maintain such contact. Overall, ambivalent infants also seem to display maladaptive behaviors throughout the strange situation. And Ainsworth and colleagues found that ambivalent infants were anxious and unconfident about their mother's responsiveness, and their mothers were observed to lack the fine sense of timing in responding to the infant's needs. As adults, those that have an anxious, preoccupied attachment style are overly concerned with the uncertainty of a relationship, and they hold a negative working model of self and a positive working model of others. Sounds like a few people I know. So the next one is avoidant attachment. Children with avoidant attachment styles tend to avoid interaction with the caregiver, and they show no distress during separation. Now, this may be because the parent has ignored attempts to be intimate, And the child may internalize the belief that they cannot depend on this or any relationship. An infant with an avoidant attachment was characterized as displaying little to no tendency of seeking proximity with the mother. And the infant often showed no distress during separation with the mother, interacted with the stranger similarly to how they would react with the mother, and show slight signs of avoidance, so turning away, avoiding eye contact, etc., when reuniting with the mother. Ainsworth and colleagues interpreted infants' avoidance behaviors as a defensive mechanism against the mother's own rejecting behaviors, such as being uncomfortable with physical contact and more easily angered by the infants. Last one that was not mentioned is called disorganized or fearful attachment. So this was discovered in 1986 by Main and Solomon, and they discovered that a sizable proportion of infants actually did not fit into secure, anxious, or avoidant based on their behaviors in the strange situation experiment. And they categorized these infants as disorganized attachment type. And this is classified by children who display sequences of behaviors that lack readily observable goals or intentions, including obviously contradictory behaviors or stealing, freezing of movements. Main and Solomon found that the parents of disorganized infants often had unresolved attachment-related traumas, which caused the parents to display either frightened or frightening behaviors, in turn resulting in the disorganized infants to be confused or forcing them to rely on someone that they were afraid of at the same time. Now, there does tend to be stages of attachment, and in 1964, Rudolf Schaffer and Peggy Emerson, they did a study of 60 babies at monthly intervals for the first 18 months of life. So children were all studied in their own home, and a regular pattern was identified in the development of attachment. So these babies were visited monthly for approximately 1 year. Their interactions with their caregivers were observed, and the caregivers were interviewed. So a diary was kept by the mother to examine the evidence for the development of attachment, and 3 measures were recorded. Of course, there's stranger anxiety, so response to arrival of a stranger, separation anxiety, distress level when separated from the caregiver, degree of comfort needed on return, and then social referencing. So the degree that the child looks at the caregiver to check how they should respond to something new, which is a secure base. And they did discover that babies attach in a certain sequence because of those things. Asocial is 0 to 6 weeks, so pretty young. And they're asocial in that many kinds of stimuli, both social and non-social, produce a favorable reaction, such as a smile. 6 weeks to 7 months is indiscriminate attachment. So infants indiscriminately enjoy human company, and most babies respond equally to any caregiver. They get upset when an individual ceases to interact with them. From 3 months old, infants smile more at familiar faces and can be easily comfortable by a regular caregiver. Specific attachment is 7 to 9 months. Special preference for a single attachment figure. So this is when the baby looks to one particular person or people, such as the parents, for security, comfort, and protection. And it shows fears of strangers and unhappiness when separated from a special person, which is separation anxiety, so one of the parents. Some babies show stranger fear and separation anxiety much more frequently and intensely than others. Nevertheless, they are seen as evidence that the baby has formed an attachment and is a secured one, and this has usually developed by 1 year of age. I will say for this, I know I have a lot of friends who have babies, and a lot of them will be like, oh, I'm sorry, he or she is very shy and they don't really like strangers, and they're kind of concerned about that. I'm like, that's actually very normal, and that actually means that they are attaching to you in a secure fashion, which is very healthy for them. So if they have a bit of stranger danger and separation anxiety, that actually shows that they are developing a healthy attachment with you and or your partner. So I do try to reassure moms or dads as much as I can, especially when they mention that and they're concerned that they kind of see it as, oh, they're so anxious about strangers, but it's actually a good thing. So about 10 months old onward, many of the babies from this study had multiple attachments to many people, and those attachments were different. So mothers and fathers, grandparents, siblings, and neighbors. So the baby becomes increasingly independent and forms several attachments, although they kind of look different. By 18 months, the majority of infants have formed multiple attachments, and they vary in their strength and importance to the infant. So attachments are often structured in a hierarchy. Of course, an infant may have formed 3 attachments, but one may be stronger than the other 2, and one may be the weakest. So obviously with their caregiver, you would hope that they have the strongest attachment to. And the results of this study indicated that these attachments were most likely to form with those who responded accurately to their signals and not really the person that they spent the most time with, like I said. So this is called sensitivity responsiveness. So if they were actually more attached with their grandparents than their parents, that shows that they spent more time with not necessarily that they spent more time with their grandparents, but that they responded better to their needs. So intensely attached infants, they had mothers who responded quickly to their demands and interacted with their child. Infants who were weakly attached had mothers who failed to interact with them. So that's attachment theory, and then we're going to talk a little bit more about the lasting impact of early attachment. I will say a lot of the theory does state that, this is kind of like within the first year of life based on the one study, but a lot do say that attachment is formed by 5 years old, more permanently. And we know that they affect future relationships, but I don't know, I have some questions with that, kind of like what I said last week. What happens if you're securely attached to your caregiver and then things change and say they, go to jail or something? Does that affect the attachment? Because if it was permanently formed and secure and then they suddenly leave one day, does that affect their attachment? Also, if that parent that you're securely attached to somehow one day as a child, maybe after 5, becomes abusive, does that mean that you're still securely attached to them and you see the abuse as normal and then that carries on to future relationships? Or would that attachment theory change to a fearful or disorganized attachment? You see how I have questions? Yeah, so in Bowlby's theory, later on he talked about the primary internal working model of relationships that they had in childhood is what they would expect in later relationships. But there's also a part where it's continuity between early attachment and later relationships, which in that hypothesis, it's humans' attachment does not conclude in infancy or even childhood, but instead is active throughout the lifespan, which individuals gaining comfort from both physical and mental representations of significant others. This was later added onto his theory, which I agree more with that. I think more psychodynamic or Freudian type models believe that attachment or development is more permanent at age 5, or I think even Erikson's psychosocial theory. And I'm more with Bowlby on this, that with his later hypothesis that it does not conclude in infancy or childhood and that it's active. Because I feel there's so many variables and there's so much that can happen between then or after. And we know that the notion of security is important, and then as you get older, autonomy is significant to attachment system in adults. And it's less likely to be activated due to them being able to tolerate higher levels of distress compared to children. And then also, like I said, at that one study that was 10 months old, that they showed that different attachment bonds were formed with different other people. And we know that attachment bonds can be formed during periods of distress or even periods of goals, achievement, and exploration. I think that's going to conclude our talk about attachment. And that includes like some of my beliefs around it and studying it. Because I do strongly believe in attachment theory. I strongly believe that the bonds we form with our primary caregivers when we are infants is very important. Also, like the stranger situation really does show that we are securely attached or not. But I do strongly believe that it can change throughout the lifespan. So with that, I'm your host, Katie Gonzalez, and you're listening to What the Psychology.
Stay psyched, y'all!